When you think of success at the NHL level, there's typically a blueprint to follow. Every player or coach is tasked with knowing their role, showing up every day, and helping put their team in a position to win. But every now and then, there's someone in the NHL whose career path takes a turn you never see coming, leaving us all scratching our heads. Keeping that in mind, here are the top 6 most confusing NHL careers. Alexander Semin. Throughout playing 650 games in the NHL, we saw Alexander Semin go from a dangerous 40 goals a season offensive threat to an absolute lazy defensive liability who seemed to not care about the game or the teams willing to pay him millions of dollars. Drafted by the Capitals 13th overall, Semin was ranked the second best European skater by NHL Central Scouting. Immediately one of the team's top prospects, Semin's future in Washington looked bright. His NHL debut did not happen until the 2003-2004 season. He showed promise early, scoring 22 points with 10 goals and 12 assists. The next season was cancelled due to the lockout, and his availability during the 2005-2006 season was erased as he was required to serve some time for the Russian army. When he finally returned to Washington, Semin made an impact and never looked back. In the 2006-2007 season, he tallied 38 goals, 35 assists, and 73 points through 73 games. At his best, he was a nearly irresistible offensive force. In his early 20s, he scored 30-plus goals and recorded 70-plus points 3 times over the span of 4 seasons with the Capitals. However, once the Capitals faced a coaching change with Boudreau leaving and Dale Hunter coming in, Semin's poor attitude and lack of team-first mentality began to become more evident. His contract was expiring, and then general manager George McPhee did not offer him a new deal. Semin then waited a few weeks before he signed a 1-year deal with the Carolina Hurricanes. After a fairly productive year, Semin was handed a monster 7-year, $35 million contract. Clearly, the Hurricanes had huge plans for him, but unfortunately, they were better off just throwing that money into a dumpster and lighting it on fire, as this was the start of Alexander Semin's NHL demise. In the 2014-2015 season, we saw Alexander Semin go from an elite goal scorer to only notching 6 goals in 57 games. Things got so bad for him in Carolina, he ended up being healthy scratched 25 times, which is an NHL record no one wants their name attached to. This was the most expensive healthy scratch season the league has ever seen. Can you imagine paying someone who has a $35 million contract to sit out more than a quarter of your games? At this point, he was being called lazy and a coach killer. Even ex-teammates were coming out saying that he simply just does not care about the game. When asked about Alexander Semin, the Carolina Hurricanes president had this to say about him. He didn't buy into the culture that our coach Bill Peters was trying to get in the locker room. When you go to practice and you have 22 guys doing things the way the coach wants and one who doesn't, it usually doesn't go well. In simple terms, we paid him $14 million to go away. After that buyout, Semin could not recover. He tried a quick stint with the Montreal Canadiens, but in 15 games played, he had 1 goal scored, and it was clear that his time in the NHL was over. Billy Kotou. We've seen some lengthy suspensions throughout NHL history, but Canadian hockey player Billy Kotou, aka Wild Beaver, is the only NHL player to be suspended from the league for life. Billy Kotou was a defenseman who played in as many as 10 seasons in the NHL, playing for the Montreal Canadiens, the Hamilton Tigers, and then finally moving to the Boston Bruins, where he'd be banned for life during the Stanley Cup Finals. Kotou turned professional with the Canadiens in the 1916-17 season, the last season of the NHA. He stayed with the Canadiens when the new NHL formed in the 1917-18 season, and during the Stanley Cup playoffs in 1919, Kotou and 4 other teammates contracted influenza and were hospitalized, leading to the cancellation of the 1919 Stanley Cup Series. After the 1925-26 NHL season, Kotou was deemed expendable and traded to the Boston Bruins. During his first practice with the Bruins, Kotou body slammed Eddie Shore. Kotou's forehead struck Shore's skull, severing Shore's ear. Shore then visited several doctors who wanted to amputate his ear, but finally found one who just sewed it back on. Yeah, this was a different time for hockey. Shore claimed Kotou used his hockey stick to cut off his ear, and Kotou was fined $50. Now, I know this was a different time, but you have to admit a $50 fine for chopping your teammate's ear off is pretty hilarious. At the end of losing Game 4 to the Ottawa Senators during the 1927 Stanley Cup Finals, Kotou started a bench-clearing brawl, apparently at the request of his coach Art Ross. Billy Kotou then assaulted referee Jerry Laflamme and tackled referee Billy Bell. He further went on to start a brawl so severe that he was hit with a life ban from the NHL. Though the ban was ultimately lifted several years later, Kotou never played in the NHL again. John Scott. John Scott's NHL career stands out as one of the strangest and most unconventional journeys in the history of the league. While many players achieve stardom through their exceptional skills and consistent performances on the ice, John Scott became a household name for entirely different reasons. His remarkable journey from an NHL enforcer to an NHL All-Star MVP is a story that defies convention and captivated hockey fans all around the world. John Scott's NHL career was defined by his role as an enforcer. Standing at 6'8" and weighing over 260 pounds, he was known for his physicality and willingness to drop the gloves to protect his teammates. Throughout his career, he laced up his skates in the NHL for 286 games, accumulating 11 points and 544 penalty minutes. Up until 2016, John Scott was just another enforcer who occasionally got some ice time to do typical enforcer things, like we see him do here with Phil Kessel. But where Scott's NHL career gets confusing was during the 2015-2016 season when a group of fans launched an online campaign to vote John Scott into the All-Star game. Their goal was to inject some fun and unpredictability into this event. Fans voted relentlessly, and despite initial resistance from the NHL, Scott gained enough support to be named an All-Star captain. Rather than declining the invitation or viewing it with skepticism, Scott wholeheartedly embraced the opportunity, but as for the NHL, they were not happy about it. Just days before the All-Star game, John Scott was traded from the Arizona Coyotes to the Montreal Canadiens in a move that many believed was designed to remove him from the All-Star game festivities. Scott was immediately demoted to Montreal's AHL team, giving them further reason to exclude him from the All-Star game. However, Scott had plenty of motivation to play in and win the All-Star game, as his salary that season was $575,000 and the winning All-Star team gets $1 million or $90,000 per player. That was 15% of Scott's salary at the time. Scott not only participated in the event, he was awarded the MVP award as a write-in candidate. 10 NHL teams casted a vote for Scott on Twitter, including the Edmonton Oilers, who voted for him over their own player in Taylor Hall. Scott appeared surprised when his name was announced as the MVP, and he also received a car for winning MVP in addition to that $90,000 of that $1 million prize. At the end of all of this, his All-Star teammates hoisted him up on their shoulders to celebrate this performance. Lonni Banes. Lonni Banes felt good about his chances of cracking the WHL's Moose Jaw Warriors roster as an 18-year-old back in 1991. The Winnipeg native had scored at more than a point per game pace in Junior A. But after 8 games and just 2 points, then Warriors head coach Mike Babcock sent Lonni Banes packing. Speaking of Mike Babcock, just as a side note, you might want to stick around because he will definitely be mentioned again. After leaving the Warriors, Banes landed with the Portland Winterhawks, and his play elevated. With his elite instincts in the offensive zone and good set of hands, Banes scored 152 points in 70 games. He'd gone undrafted, and a trip to the Calgary Flames training camp as a walk-on opened his eyes to how much better he'd have to be to play at the NHL level. Banes found himself with a WHL scoring title to his name, but no NHL offers on the table. After landing with the AHL's Syracuse Crunch, then the Vancouver Canucks affiliate, Banes played 39 NHL games over 4 seasons. After being traded to the Leafs March 7, 1998, he continued to tear up the AHL, leading the St. John's Maple Leafs in scoring the following season and earning a 7-game look with the big club at the end of the 1999 season. When the St. John's Maple Leafs were eliminated in 5 games in their first playoff series against the Fredericton Canadiens without a contract in hand for the following season, Banes thought his time with the Leafs organization was over, especially following an off-ice incident toward the end of the Canadian series where Banes got into a fight outside a St. John's bar with then Fredericton Canadiens head coach Michel Therrien. Banes was charged with common assault, but the charges were eventually dropped. Meanwhile, in Toronto, the Maple Leafs had scored only 9 goals in their first round 6-game series win over the Philadelphia Flyers. The team was looking for an offensive boost, and so on May 7th, Banes got the call up to the big club. Following the morning skate before Game 2 against the Pittsburgh Penguins, Banes was told to take the pre-game warm-up, but was given no assurance beyond that. In the warm-up, he was an extra forward. As he walked off the ice, the assistant coach told him to check the lineup written in the dressing room, and sure enough, Banes found himself on the first line with Matt Sundin and Steve Thomas. As he recalls, Sundin walked over to him, looked him in the eye, and said, "Let's go out there and have some fun." Banes burst onto the scene and he put up 9 goals in 9 games during that postseason. Only Matt Sundin and Sergei Berezin had more points for the Leafs that spring. Unfortunately, after this playoff run, Banes disappeared off the NHL map and never recorded another point in the league. He wound up playing the next season in the AHL, followed by several years in Switzerland. Gilles Graton. Chances are you have never heard of Gilles Graton, but he is hands down the strangest, most confusing goalie to have ever played in the NHL. He only played 47 career NHL games in the 1970s, but was quite the character. Graton claimed to teammates that he remembered to live prior lives, as his current life as an NHL goalie was punishment for his previous misdeeds. In one interview with Marv Albert, Marv asked him about one of his many nicknames, the Count. Graton said, "Well, I've got something to tell you. In my last life, I was a Spanish count, and one of the things I loved to do when I was in Spain was take all the commoners, line them up against the wall, and throw rocks at them." Rod Gilbert, NHL Hall of Famer, claimed Graton was the most talented goalie he had ever played with. But after being hypnotized one night, Graton began to believe he was an executioner who used to stone people to death. Then when pucks were fired at him, he believed they were stones and would jump out of the way. Can you believe this guy played in the NHL? Despite all his crazy antics, Graton did have hockey talent. He was an all-star in the last year of his junior hockey career. He played 3 years in the WHA, compiling a respectable 81 wins, 66 losses, and 7 ties. He was even part of the WHA Summit Series team that took on the Soviets in 1974, although he only saw 2 minutes of action. His NHL numbers are a little less impressive, playing only 6 contests for the St. Louis Blues in the 1975-76 season, sporting a 2-0-2 record with a .249 GAA. Graton actually retired in November of that season because he didn't want to play for the Blues and instead wanted to return to the WHA Toronto Toros. The following year, he became an unrestricted free agent and signed with the New York Rangers. He appeared in 41 games, winning a total of 11, losing 18, and tying 7. Graton quit hockey at the age of 24. The last time anyone had heard from him, it was said that he was living in some old abandoned castle in Europe somewhere and was apparently a photographer. Mike Babcock. Mike Babcock's ascent in the NHL coaching ranks was nothing short of impressive. He began his NHL coaching career with the Anaheim Ducks in 2002 and quickly made a name for himself. In just his second season, he led the Ducks to the Stanley Cup Finals in 2003, although they fell short. However, his success did not go unnoticed and he was hired as the head coach for the Detroit Red Wings in 2005. During his tenure with the Red Wings, Babcock established himself as one of the league's premier coaches. He guided Detroit to a Stanley Cup championship in 2008 and helped the team maintain its status as a perennial contender. His coaching style emphasized discipline, strong defensive play, and attention to detail, earning him high praise from media. From the outside looking in, the high praise was deserved for sure. However, for the players in Babcock's dressing room, it was a different story, filled with mental warfare. Former Detroit Red Wings forward Johan Franzen has told Swedish media Mike Babcock is the worst person I have ever met. He was a bully who was attacking people. It could be a cleaner at the arena in Detroit or anybody. He would lay into people without any reason. Franzen's teammate Chris Chelios had this to say. Some of the things Babcock said to Franzen on the bench, I don't know what he said to him behind closed doors one-on-one, but he blatantly verbally assaulted him during the game on the bench. It got to the point where poor Johan, no one really knowing he was suffering with a concussion thing and the depression thing, he just broke down and had a nervous breakdown, not only on the bench but after the game in one of the rooms in Nashville. It was probably one of the worst things I have ever seen, said Chelios. Another confusing Babcock mind game was in the 2010-2011 season, where legendary Mike Modano signed a one-year deal with his hometown Red Wings. Modano was hoping to have one final go at making a deep playoff run. Unfortunately, he ended up missing a significant portion of that season due to a wrist injury, but toward the end of the season, he was healthy and ready to go for the playoffs. He was approaching 1,500 NHL career games played, but Babcock decided to healthy scratch him, making sure Modano never reached that milestone. Babcock had other plans for the fan favorite that would keep him at 1,499 career games played and out of the lineup for the majority of their postseason. Fast forward to Babcock being the bench boss for the Maple Leafs, and his antics continued as he drove a 19-year-old Mitch Marner to tears. The Maple Leafs were on a father-son road trip when Mike Babcock confronted a then-rookie Mitch Marner about what he perceived to be the young player's laziness on and off the ice. In an effort to drive his point home, Mike Babcock asked Marner to create a list of all players on the Maple Leafs roster and then asked him to rank them based on their respective effort level in that particular season. Marner obliged when his coach demanded this of him, and according to multiple sources, Marner put his name in the very last spot on the list, as if to acknowledge that he could work much harder. It was a show of maturity on the part of Marner, but what the young Maple Leaf did not know at the time was that Babcock had planned to use that list against some of his players. Babcock then reportedly took the list and is believed to have shown it to two players in particular, Toronto Maple Leaf veterans Tyler Bozak and Nazem Kadri. According to multiple sources, Marner was in tears after the details of his list were shared. And then of course you have the most recent example of Babcock's power-tripping narcissism in what is the briefest head coaching stint in NHL history. Babcock has to be a sociopath for doing the exact same thing that got him removed from the league in the first place. Finding himself coaching Columbus was his shot at redemption, and it fizzled out before training camp even started. Babcock was forced to resign 5 days after the Spittin' Chicklets podcast reported that Babcock, who had been hired July 1st, asked players to share personal photos on their private mobile devices. The situation was investigated by the NHLPA 1 week prior to Babcock announcing his resignation. This certainly has to be the last straw for Mike Babcock. It's honestly baffling that he was even able to make a comeback in the first place after everything he's done over the years. Thanks for watching our videos. Don't forget to leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button.